Right, welcome back. Now, from disguising their identity to avoiding social functions, sleeping away from home, sometimes changing jobs, doubling back twice on your drive home, all of these are strategies adopted by journalists to deal with threats and harassment on the job. Now, the growing cases of attacks against media persons across the globe dominated discussions at the just-ended World Press Freedom Forum in London. And today we're going to take a look at how some journalists who have come under attack are dealing with such threats. But first, let's listen to investigative journalist Anas Aremiao Anas making a case for justice for journalists who have been attacked in the line of duty.
In recent times, there's been developments in Ghana that are quite worrying. I recall the death of Ahmed Swale, one of the energetic reporters that ever joined the stable of Tiger Eye. I also acknowledge the fact that sometimes media people have been irresponsible. We know that. But hey, we are a mushrooming democracy. Just as our judiciary has its problems, the police has it, the media has its problems too. And I dare say, and would say it every day, when the politicians mounted the podium and said they will hang journalists, and said that they would beat journalists, if government had spoken and had been firm about it, Ahmed Swale would not have died. So when it comes to media responsibility, it's for all of us to stand up, say it as it is. Because truth is that the gun or the torture that was meted out to Ahmed Khashoggi, the gun that was used to shoot Ahmed Swale still lives. And that same gun will be used against the politician if we don't stand up and fight for media freedom. Again, I have been thinking, how do we empower these people who disrupt media freedom? It hurts me that the West will give us money in one hand to enhance our democracy. And in the same hand, people who disrupt this democracy and media freedoms are given the opportunity to stash their money in banks in the West. How can we be giving food in one hand and another hand being used to take the food from our mouths? When we continue to empower these people, give them safe homes, create problems in Ghana, run and come and stay in London, or run and go and stay in any other European country, has access to all his funds and can do anything, it hurts. Because it means that we are not looking at the fuller picture. The earlier we stand up and be straight with these people, the better for us.
Right, journalist Anas Aremiao Anas there making a case for journalists attacked in the line of duty. Now, we've put together a news desk report looking at events so far. We'll bring you details of that shortly. But first in the studio with me is Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa, Suleiman Abrahima. He joins me in the studio for a discussion on this subject. Also, investigative journalist here at JoyNews, Manasseh Azuriawini, is here. Gentlemen, good to see you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so maybe I'll start with you, Manasseh, because very recently you have been a victim of harassment, intimidation as a result of your work. Tell me, what was the reality of it? How far did things go? What did you have to do to stay safe?
Well, the farthest I had to go was to go to South Africa with the help of the Media Foundation. And unfortunately, I have had to now move with police, which is something I never thought would happen, and which I'm not comfortable with, because if you're somebody who respects your privacy, you wouldn't want to be driving all the time with another person seated by you. So that alone is very uncomfortable. But these are things I have had to cope with if I'm to stay safe. And it's unfortunate. And when people meet you, they know you're a journalist. I'm not even talking about media persons. They always express worry about the growing threats against media practitioners or journalists. And this is not something I ever thought would happen in my lifetime as a journalist, because at conferences, I always boast that Ghanaian journalists are among the luckiest on the planet. Unfortunately, I cannot say same when I travel today.
Wow, your opinion has changed.
Yes.
Now, this might sound like an obvious question, but because I want you to explain in your own words, I'll ask it anyway. But how has this affected your ability to do your job? I mean, you're an investigative journalist, and now you're driving around with a police officer in your passenger seat. How has that affected your ability to work?
Well, it isn't everything I can discuss on air, but obviously, if you're an investigative journalist, the people you meet also need their privacy.
Yes.
There are people who would want to meet you alone. They don't even want anybody to see their car driving towards you. So that becomes a challenge when you go and then you'd have to introduce a third person, the person waiting for you. Even to know that you went to that particular environment, they wouldn't want a third person to know. So when all of these happen, it affects the very core of your day-to-day activities and how you gather information, and also can also compromise your sources, because people want to feel secure when dealing with you. So when they begin to know that, okay, there's another person who is likely to come to this neighborhood with him, they don't feel comfortable.
Can you imagine? Now, Mr. Brymer, the perception is that under the present regime, there appear to be perhaps a few too many of these reported incidents of either intimidation or harm coming to journalists while they're doing their job. But I want to know, is it a perception, or are there facts to bear it out?
Well, on the surface of it, and based on reports that continue to emerge, perhaps ordinarily people can draw that conclusion. But given where I sit, without evidence, it's difficult for me to draw that conclusion. However, in our day-to-day analysis of the situation across West Africa, there are a number of dimensions that we look at. For example, there are a number of countries where there will be a lot of incidents happening. But even though the numbers matter, the gravity sometimes is perhaps what is even more important. So, for example, you may have a situation where journalists have their equipment seized, which is critical. A journalist has been slapped for doing their work, which is critical. But if you begin to have situations where journalists killed, journalists threatened, and the threat level considered so high, then indeed that becomes a very deteriorating situation. And I've said that I've been at the Media Foundation for the last 10 years. Started off with programming, and then joined management, and now leading the organization. I haven't had the occasion to even contemplate supporting a Ghanaian journalist on a matter of safety, directly. Over the years, we've done, some safe haven programs for people in the Gambia, for people in Nigeria, sometimes as far as people coming from DRC and so on. But just this year we had the murder of Ahmed Swale. We've had the incident of a very severe threat against Manasseh, and beyond that we've seen the activities of some security agencies against journalists and so on and so forth. So as I said, ordinarily people may not be far from right in drawing that conclusion. However, it's also important to state that it's important to look at whether the attacks and threats are state sponsored or are coming from individuals and citizens. What we are seeing quite often here is citizens, political party activists, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, when things are happening that way, you would expect the system to respond. But what we are not seeing is the response from the system. You would want to see a robust response from, let's say, state authorities that would send a signal that, well, you threaten a journalist or you attack a journalist at your own risk. And over the years, all the number of attacks and threats and so on that we've responded, no person has been prosecuted, nobody has been jailed, and there hasn't been any significant fine against anyone. And the culture of impunity continues And as they say, impunity breeds impunity. And that is why we are in critical times.
I think you made an important point. I mean, there are several parameters on which you could judge an administration on how well they support the work of journalists or how well they promote press freedom. So one would be how many incidents occur, how many of them are state-sponsored. But also, you've talked about the other aspect, which is how they respond. Now, let's focus on that for a moment. We currently have a president who has a record as being a human rights advocate. He defended journalists pro bono as a private citizen on several occasions. He is the one who is seen as the champion behind the repealing of the criminal libel and seditious libel laws. And we also have a minister for information, a sector minister, who used to be a journalist. You would think that this would be the golden age for the press. What do you think accounts for this? What is mitigating against all these would-be favorable factors?
Well, I think number one would be the growing sense of intolerance. And there is an author who has said that if journalists come under attack in a particular government, there can be three things. One is either to suppress dissent, to conceal corruption, or to keep staying in power. Now, the growing sense of intolerance that we have, which is really coming from political activists, is perhaps as a result of these three factors. It's either people are not comfortable with people expressing dissenting voices, which may sound cacophonous in their ears because truth is being said, or is that certain acts of corruption that are being exposed by journalists they are not comfortable with, or they feel, journalists speaking truth to power and revealing things would certainly constitute a threat to the possibility of they staying in power. Now, I was in London last week, at the forum where Anas spoke.
Yeah.
And people that I met from the UN level, top level people from the UN level, government officials from other countries who got to know me because I spoke at a panel, they all express the same sentiments that you are expressing. I met a high-level official from the UN who said, I'm hearing Ghana, things are happening. And all of us are surprised because we thought, we are reading that this regime traditionally has been friendly to the media. And so it's surprising what we are witnessing, particularly the gravity of it, where a journalist has been killed. We don't know where the investigations are now. A prominent journalist severely threatened and has had to, adopt measures to stay safe. We don't know what has happened to those who, issued all those threats and so on and so forth. So I think for me, it is the growing sense of intolerance. And again, the non-responsiveness on the part of the authorities. Because the very last statement we issued on the growing trends has been to call on the president himself to make a statement about it. We haven't heard anything. Perhaps same as when things happened under Mahama and we demanded a personal action and there was nothing. So I'm beginning to believe that yes, the current president we know has been part of the fights for democracy, human rights, and so on and so forth. On the repeal of criminal libel law, yeah, he was the Attorney General, but I don't think that anything that Gloria Kufu does today would be on the basis that she did it and on the basis that she believed in it. It could be as a result of maybe the president wanting something to be done. So sometimes I would give more credit to President Kufu, who was the president then, because if he didn't want it, it wouldn't have been done, even if the Attorney General at the time wanted it. So I think it's important that the president and the vice president, all these people begin to speak up, because it's something that is really embarrassing our country. People see Ghana as the model. And so if in Ghana we are beginning to witness these things, then of course the credentials that we have is being undermined.
Now, Manasseh, there's something I've always wanted to ask you, and I will in just a moment. But first, we've put together a news desk report just to illustrate some of the goings-on that have occurred, especially under this regime, regarding threats to press freedom. Let's check it out.
Media Foundation for West Africa also released a report spanning an 18-month period. The report documented 31 cases of violation against journalists and media houses. The majority of these violations have been physical attacks and severe threats. There have also been one incident of murder, and for the first time in over a decade, justice for the murdered journalist Ahmed Swale is yet to be achieved, as the police says the matter is being investigated. Let's listen to CID boss Mamitiwa Adodankwa. She spoke 3 months ago.
We've done lots of investigations, and through the eyewitness, we have been able to come a long way. Unfortunately, I'm unable to provide the details of what we have done so that we don't compromise the investigation. We have gone far. In the course of these investigations, 13 suspects have been questioned. One is currently on remand, assisting us in
the latest of a series of very sad developments for media freedom in Ghana, national security operatives on June 27, 2019, stormed the offices of an online media, modernghana.com, and arrested 2 of its staff, including a deputy editor. Here's one of the journalists, Emmanuel Ajavo, narrating what he went through.
So I lay down flat.
So something like this?
Yeah, so something like this. So the guy lifted me this way, you know, and pulled this way. You see? So this way, when I was this way, then the other guy came, and then here, you see, and he hit me, and I fell flat.
On your spine?
Yes, on my spine. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
On my spine. I fell flat. And at that moment, I couldn't breathe well. You know, your spine controls your nervous system, your breath and all that. So I couldn't breathe, so I had to open my mouth.
And they were looking on?
And they were looking.
And this time they were not questioning?
They were still, the questioning were coming left, right. And you see,
on the same subject?
So when one person asks a question you want to answer, then another person interjects. They'll hear you interject, then slap from behind. And you know, they are slapping from behind.
In the case of Justice for Latif Idris, a journalist here at JoyNews, who was left with a fractured skull after the police brutally assaulted him in front of the Criminal Investigations Department's headquarters in Accra, we can't say we are anywhere near justice because the docket has gone missing for months, just when a new docket was built last week. We are now told the original docket has been found. In some cases, like the Star FM journalist Edward Adeti, who was at the center of an expose involving former Minister of State at the presidency, Roxanne Bukari, he received several deaths, forcing him to flee his community.
The threat, some people went on radio just saying a lot of things like, unless I leave where I am, I will not be safe. I will regret what I have done. Then a text also came whilst I had to relocate to Accra temporarily. So after the resignation, I had to relocate because of the threat. My family also had to leave the house because I left the Upper East first. Then they broke into my house in the absence of my wife and kids. When they they didn't meet me, but according to security experts, actually I was the one they were looking for. But they had to feign robbery, pretend they came to rob so that I would not suspect they were looking for me. So I would relax and they would come get me and then do whatever they wanted to do. So I was asked to stay in Accra for as long as a month or so. So while there, I was getting calls from friends that I should still stay there because people are all over on radio, especially those who were supporting the minister, because he's from the Upper East region, saying lots of things. I could be in the office or at home and they will come to attack. I will not even remember her before, let alone to say I want to place a call to the police. But I don't see any commitment on the part of the police. So for now, all I'm doing is just see how I can protect myself to go. I don't go. But I disguise when I'm going out. I just disguise if the night catches me in the office, I wear a wig and it's one of those I just announced as well when I was in Accra.
In the case between Adum FM's Ohima Sechiwa and Hajia Fati and NPP, the civil case has ended. We are awaiting judgment this month. The list for justice for abused journalists goes on and on.
Yeah, difficult to listen to some of that. Manasseh, this is what I've always wanted to ask you, especially after the recent threats to your life. Have you been tempted to quit?
No, I haven't been tempted to quit, except that it becomes very difficult when family members and loved ones continuously call to caution you to be careful. Now you meet anybody at all and the conversation doesn't end without that person asking you to be careful, and the terrain is becoming so hostile, and when all of that happens, psychologically it takes a heavy toll on you, the journalist. So it becomes more and more difficult in the job, but to quit, no.
I mean, you don't want to lose your life, obviously. We don't want to lose you. So what is it that makes you feel like it is still worth it to keep doing a job that is now a threat to your life?
Well, I consider a lot of jobs to be dangerous. For instance, every evening we have police officers who go to confront armed robbers. Theirs is also dangerous. So if we want to all say our jobs are dangerous or our lives are in danger and go to sleep, we will be empowering such people who are doing this, because the main reason they do this is to get everyone to shut up. So if we succumb to their threats, then we are likely to give them the leeway to continue doing whatever they want to do. But if we stay on and encourage more other people to get in, I think this is a fight we should not lose. Because I always say that if you take Ghana's democracy, I say our democracy is useless because it does not deliver the democratic goods that democracy is supposed to. Even sanitation, we can't keep our environments clean. We don't have water to drink for a lot of people. The only thing we have over the years prided ourselves in is the fact that Ghanaians are able to express themselves very freely. Before we even got to attacks on journalists, increasingly you'd want to speak to private people, businesses, and they will tell you, look, this issue, I have a lot of expertise, but if I speak, I'll be targeted. I went to 53 assemblies across the country. Not even one coordinating director was able to speak to me. They all said if I speak, I might lose my job because we have to get clearance from Accra. So quite a number of people, a huge constituency, is left out of the ability to express themselves. Now journalists who are supposed to be at the forefront of free speech are also being targeted. So if we succumb to these threats, we are going to lose everything, and there will be no difference between us and countries like Afghanistan and those, Somalia and the rest, if we are not allowed to speak. So I think we shouldn't give up. We should continue fighting. And like Sule said, we should call on the president to act, because I believe the body language of the president has a lot to say about how things should do. Because when people want to act or whatever, they look at the atmosphere, they look at the prevailing condition. If the government is against something and communicates that through action, people are likely, yes, people are likely to stay away. But if the government is silent, and not only silent, but seems to be encouraging, because this attack and raid on modern Ghana, I think it's one of the most serious things that could happen to a journalist. Not only were they allegedly tortured, but their mobile phones were seized, their computers. That compromises the security of even their sources, people who give them information. And this is from the government. All these are happening. Recently there were reports of media boycott, so we have friends within government, you speak to them, so how is the president taking this? Oh, they tell you he's in support of the boycott. So the president himself would need to show a body language within the, or in the Mahama regime, for instance. You had people like Standogbe who misbehaved towards the journalist. But I can also say personally that the president was in a way supportive. The day, for instance, I did the Ford story, that the government was very hot. That night, the communications minister, Edward Omanebuama, called me. And what he said was that, look, we are concerned that some people may not be happy with what you have done, but we know we are not happy, but you've done your work. If you ever feel threatened, we can get police to come to your house. So this is what the government, even though was not happy with my work, was very proactive in doing. So what I'm saying is that
the same thing that this government has done.
Well, we had to reach. We reached out and they responded. But I'm saying that if there's a bit of a difference. But all that I'm saying is that the president and the presidency should be seen to be fighting against some of these things. You have seen some reactions from the information ministry, which for me have also not been very encouraging. And like you said, we have one of our colleagues up there. There is this saying that if you attend a funeral and then your mother is in the kitchen, you are always happy because no matter how difficult it is to find food, your mother would surely get you something. So we have one of our own in the kitchen, but it seems we are even hungrier than before.
Well, what's your assessment quickly, though, of the president and his efforts towards press freedom?
Well, I think it's disappointing, and I have written about it because the Akufo-Addo we eulogized while in opposition is not the Akufo-Addo I am seen as a president. I am very disappointed, and I've written about it a number of times. And this reminds me of a question Kaba, the late Kaba, asked.
Yeah.
The first Meet the Press series, Kaba asked the question whether the presidency had tamed Mr. Akufo-Addo. And I think that is what some of us believe.
Now, Mr. Brima, I want to ask about the public's attitude towards the media. Now, recently, I think there was an Afrobarometer report that suggested that many Ghanaians, in fact, increasing numbers of Ghanaians, think that journalists have too much freedom and that some of their liberties should be curtailed. We've also had phone-in shows following attacks on journalists where you've heard members of the public say they deserved it. Do you think that this whole battle for press freedom and so forth is something that the average Ghanaian connects with, or do they think it's just for the media?
Well, certainly there are problems when it comes to the media's role in advancing accountability, transparency, and making sure that the public, members of the public, are able to access public goods and services. Now, in the lead up to democratization, the media certainly played a very, very crucial role. And I believe that the public, then members of the public, acknowledged that we got the democracy we have now thanks partly to the role of the media. And of course, at that time, we didn't have as many media organizations as we do have now. I've said elsewhere that we continue to see a lot of media organizations, media pluralism, but increasingly we are seeing less journalism. And I think that is what is driving the public opinion in a negative way, in terms of the masses wanting to see that their roads are fixed, their schools are fixed, their hospitals are fixed, you know, what access to water, and so on and so forth. And they need journalists to tell the stories as they are. But people believe that, well, there are a number of people in the media space now working as journalists, working for themselves instead of the public interest. And I think that is something that is critical. Others also believe that there is high levels of unprofessional conduct in terms of unethical behavior, in terms of journalists using their platforms to advance the agenda and propaganda of different political parties and different political actors. And I guess in the fight for press freedom, that's also an area that we need to look at. But whatever it is, nothing would justify an abuse on a journalist. You know, I said this morning in our meeting that no one has a right not to be offended. You know, I've read about rights, but I don't know any particular right that says I have a right not to be offended. And in the nature of governance in Africa, how bad it is, I think that good journalism would always hurt someone. And Jeremy Hunt at last week's conference in London said, look, as a foreign minister, the freedom that we've given to the BBC, we're all happy about it. Until you are confronted with, you know, critical questions from, you know, a team of BBC journalists, then you begin to ask yourself, must we continue to grant them this kind of freedom that we have? And he used an analogy that, well, if you're a politician, what you have to know in terms of granting press freedom is almost like a turkey voting for, you know, Christmas, knowing very well that the media have to do their job.
Yeah.
And if they do it well, it helps you correct your mistakes. That's if you are willing to correct your mistakes. But it appears to me that in many African countries, including Ghana now, good journalism is not something that, you know, the system wants. It's not something that the governments are happy about. But as Manasseh said, the way forward is not to give up. The way forward is actually to even do more. And that is why going forward, whatever it takes to be able to support a number of journalists, we will do that. And it is important to build a core group of journalists who will be doing the work. See, it's easy to target and attack Manasseh if he's alone, to target and attack Kojo Yankson if he's alone. But if we have the hundreds of Manassehs, tens of Manassehs, who are you attacking and who are you leaving? I think that is the challenge that we face in terms of being able to continue to build a core group of journalists who would be dedicated to doing the work of journalism and not just sitting on radio stations or media outlets and saying that, you know, I'm a journalist and so on and so forth. So yes, people may be disappointed because of our own inability to serve their interest, but the way forward is to continue to see how we can, you know, empower journalists to do more and more of good work.
Right. Well, I wonder, Manasseh, whether you consider the, well, it's too late for you now, but do you wish you had done the whole covering of face thing that Anas does?
Not every journalist can cover their face, and I don't think we should encourage journalists to cover their faces. The criminals we are fighting walk freely, so why should we cover our faces? We should let everybody know, and that's what any civilized society should do. If you disagree with me, there's something you can do. You can go to court, but you don't have the right to attack anybody, let alone a journalist who speaks his or her mind. So I don't think it is something we should encourage journalists to even run away or hide.
To extend the question I asked Sule, who do you think has attacked you more, government or the public?
I would say the public, and not just the public, but people motivated by politics. Because sometimes when you, even social media, somebody comes to abuse you, click on their profile, you are likely to see an NDC, whatever candidate, or an MPP candidate, or their flags and others. So most of the time, you have that. And quite recently, I think there's also a phenomenon where you'd have a lot of people who have government or work in government positions, even some in the Flagstaff House, very active on social media, and sometimes when you read the arguments or the comments, it is as if somebody somewhere grouped people and said, this is how we are supposed to go. And sometimes they come with a message, not even responding to the issue you have raised. It is as if they are coming with their comments to look for a post and put it under. And this trend appears well coordinated, and it's also very worrying.
Right. Well, here at JoyNews, we're certainly pursuing press freedom and an enhancement of the freedoms that the press are entitled to in order for them to do a good job on your behalf. So this is perhaps the first in many conversations that we will be having here to further this, because press freedom is your freedom in the end, because whatever we do, we bring to you. Before we go, by the way, thank you both for making the time to be with us. But before we go, Kojo Nkrumah was at the same forum that you attended in London, and Israel Lai took the opportunity to catch up with him to talk about press freedom. Let's hear what he had to say.
So for us back home in Ghana, we're rolling out the Media Capacity Enhancement Program, which has many of your organizations and your press houses on it, in identifying what the gaps are, what the interventions ought to be. Government is just working to provide the funding for these intervention programs so that we can lift the quality of journalism and crowd out bad journalism, crowd out misinformation, and I dare say even disinformation. That's one of the first things we're doing. And it's exciting to know that on a global platform, this is something that is being talked about. Indeed, they are creating a global media protection fund, and we're arguing that part of those resources should be channeled towards training and assisting of media persons to lift their capacities. It's not enough just to wait for the person to get into trouble and then you are hiring lawyers for the person and trying to give them safe havens. We think it serves a better purpose to invest in their training, invest in their capacity enhancement, so that they can 99.99% of the time get it right. And not get into...
You indicated during one of your deliveries that we're looking at making it effective by the end of this month.
Yes.
How far are we?
Indeed, on Monday in Accra, the first validation workshop for the draft framework is taking place. It's being led by the Honorable Pius Ajide, who's Deputy Minister for Information. And on the platform, UNESCO and all of the other stakeholder groups are coming to look at the draft and contribute to it so that before the end of July, we have Ghana's blueprint for this coordinated mechanism. The idea is to have the media actors, the media trainers, civil society organizations, the judiciary, the security agencies, all on a common platform, so that A, we can do some deeper education for everybody on what our common responsibilities are in upholding free and responsible media.